Alright, what's poppin', Digi-Chads? I'm here for a review of the new Digimon game. Of course, I waited a week after it came out, because fuck the rat race. I'm gonna give you an honest review of the game, and I'm gonna give you some actual opinions instead of just giving you first impressions. So fuck what you heard. For this real shit, kick your whole clique to the curb. Alright, so I'm entirely blind going in. I hate hype. I don't really care about spoilers, but I hate hype. I'm not one of those people who says, wow, I know 2 things about this game, I'm so excited. I wait for the fucking thing to come out, and then I play it or experience it, then I tell you what I think. Full disclosure, of course, this is a review from a Digimon fan. I do think that Cyber Sleuth and Hacker's Memory is the greatest piece of Digimon media, period, let alone game. So the fact that Habu, the director of CSHM, also directed this game made me somewhat optimistic about it, but I also knew going in that key elements of the game would be things that I don't really enjoy. So I was prepared to tolerate parts that I didn't like to potentially see parts that I'd really like. So Survive opens the worst way possible that any video game can open. 1 hour of unskippable cutscenes, most of which are just reading text, and the first 30 minutes of which simply tells you that they were at camp for the summer, went to see a shrine, got sucked into the digital world, and did not need 30 minutes to explain. You'll find that this game is extremely long-winded. In fact, a lot of times, something will happen and the main character will just start thinking to himself, but what he's thinking is just describing the thing that just happened in front of you in like 5 more text boxes that you didn't need. Like, my god, get ready to read if you want to play this game.
I was elected to lead, not to read.
This game teases you with its combat, reminding you that there is a game to be played, but you must read this visual novel first. If you love visual novels, this is the game for you. If you love games, you're gonna have to read a visual novel to play the game. When I looked free combat for the first time, I actually gasped and jumped out of my seat because I was so excited. And like the rest of the night, I just played free combat and I had so much fun. While I was bogged down by the horrible rehash of Digimon Adventure that this game calls a story that it starts out with, I would randomly have moments where I'd remember that one of the characters has a Lopmon, and then I felt a jolt of joy as I realized there's going to be an Antilamon in this game. I love Antilamon. And a Wendigomon. And he's not even in Cyber Sleuth, and he's such a cool Digimon. And what's Falcomon's evil line going to look like? Or Labramon's? All these questions that I wanted to be answered, all these cool things that could happen. And it was as if my hope was being kept alive just barely by the idea of possible cool things that I might see in this very slow opening that many games like to do. So the positive aspects are that even though it starts out like a Digimon Adventure rehash for some reason, the story actually stands on its own and really didn't need to have all these remember the 90s references that it starts out with.
Remember the 90s? The 90s were so much better. Remember
Digimon Adventure?
It was a good show. You're too young to remember. It was a good show.
Because as it gets going, it becomes its own thing and totally blows Adventure's story out of the water, and Adventure's got a pretty good story. There's some pretty predictable Digimon kind of things, like there's a Gabumon at the beginning in the tutorial, and the MC uses an Agumon, like, oh gee, is there gonna be an Omnimon later? Enough of the Gen 1 fan service.
It was a good show.
But you know, let's go back to the best part of the game, and that is the combat, because Free Battle was cool not only because I got to use super amazing combat mechanics that I was super excited for, given my love for Final Fantasy Tactics and Advanced Wars, basically any tactical RPG, but the fact that you can strike up a conversation with the enemies was a super neat touch, and I'm glad to see the inspiration from the old Shin Megami games or Undertale or what have you. And the conversations for the Digimon are so much fun, and I loved them. I would play Digimon Battle/Conversation Simulator for hours on end, no problem. So I did with Free Battle. The conversations are pretty cool because there's kind of a meta gameplay aspect to it where on one hand you're just memorizing things, and like sure, later on in the game I just looked up a guide because I just want to collect the Digimon kind of thing, and I'll get to that later why I got in a bit of a rush near the end of the game. But there's the idea that you're kind of like reciprocating and parroting back ideas between somebody is like an actual conversation, which I think is cool. The game functionally makes you emulate a conversation through its mechanics using limited text. I mean, that's just really cool. It kind of reminds me of like Metal Gear Solid, like Hideo Kojima's type stuff, where they're just gonna like think about what it means to play a video game and how what you're doing in a video game can influence how you're going to play the game. The artwork of the human characters in the talk menu is super great, a reference to the classic Digimon art styles. I love the idea. And the tweening animation of the battles actually gets a pass from me. I guess we've come far enough with digital animation that tweening can look clean and even stylized, for the most part. The sort of chibi representations of the Digimon are super charming, and I love them. Recruiting enemy Digimon is a nice reference to the dynamics of the Digimon allies the Digidestined made during the Adventure anime. So this is a good way to reference older media, in my opinion. You can recruit wild Digimon and they stay as whatever level they're at, kind of like how the Adventure cast had Leomon as their partner, and like the Andromon and stuff like that. versus the Digimon you carry with you who have to digivolve up to their higher forms in the middle of battle. But to contrast that, Digimon who have a human tamer can use the talk command to talk to enemy Digimon or friendly Digimon to give them stat boost, which is an awesome feature because it doesn't take up any time during your turn, so it's just a cool free little thing you can experiment with. The battle system has enough options to give you lots of stuff to work with without overwhelming you, and I think that's really smart and well designed. This game definitely learned a lot of lessons from its predecessors, not just Digimon games, but games altogether. The fact that you can get EXP after battle, even through using non-lethal victory methods, is super nice, because for a long time, I was using non-lethal methods. I was just talking to all the Digimon, and I got some pretty cool XP from doing it. Not to mention you get EXP if your guy was fainted during the battle. I mean, I can't believe RPGs still have the mechanic that if your guy is dead, he doesn't get EXP at the end of the battle. That is one of the worst things any RPG can have, because then battles, and especially boss fights, which give you huge nukes of EXP, just become revive this guy and keep him alive simulator. Super fucking annoying. The ability to reorient yourself after moving, so that way you don't have to move in awkward ways to try to get yourself facing the right direction. These are some of the little aspects of gameplay that go a long way in creating a positive user experience that games in 2022 should not be devoid of. So I've been getting more success in recruiting virus Digimon like Gazimon since I started throwing choices for Wrathful Karma. It's cool on a meta level that you're not really playing the character, but you're deciding what kind of character he is. But at the same time, much like Hacker's Memory versus Cyber Sleuth, you're kind of watching somebody's story rather than participating in it, which isn't necessarily bad, it's just a different kind of game. But keep that in mind. This is very much you're watching a story happen and determining small bits of it, versus a game where you explore and play on your own and determine how you're going to create what Digimon you want to make. Free time really feels like a chore, since it seems you have exactly as many free moves as there are things to do. So it's essentially just do all the things. But I think there actually are some times you have to pick, but it's not really a big deal. It's just a way for you to micromanage your affinity with other characters, which is the way through which they actually get their Digimon to digivolve. So if you want to see like big cool Mega Digimon, you're only going to get them to evolve there if you save state before every choice. And it's too bad there is not a quick save, quick load in this game. I just said that it learned from its predecessors and its genres, yet a staple of visual novel games, which would be super useful in this game, not present at all. So the first time you play this game, it's definitely going to be a new game minus. That's how my friend Clem described it, because you're not experiencing the full game. You're just meant to absorb the story and see for yourself how, if you were in that situation, things would develop the way they did. Which is great. It's a fine experience, but just you have to know that going in, and I don't think that... I just don't think it's the move when the franchise is where it's at, and this games have been so delayed, and it's kind of hyped up, and you go for such a, like, non-approachable title to release at this time. I don't get it, but doesn't mean the game's bad. It just means that I don't think this is the tactful way to do things. So as I get close to the end of the game, I found out there's a New Game Plus, and in New Game Plus you get a true ending. And through doing New Game Plus with all the info I have, I'll be able to plan ahead, and kind of like a classic Digimon game where I just get to choose the Digimon I want to have, the routes I want to go. So that's what really got me excited at the end of the game, was New Game Plus on this game that I kind of was frustrated with at times and didn't like how long it was. And thankfully there is a way to skip through text going frame by frame, but for some reason no way just to skip to the choices. So you go New Game Minus, then you have to go New Game Plus to fully experience it the way that you would normally experience a Digimon game. Not really a bad thing against the game, just, you know, if anything, it gives you the option to experience it the way a lot of people think they would experience a Digimon game. But it's kind of sad that they put so much effort into this visual novel where there's just a few forks in the road, because no visual novel is actually going to give you a free experience where you get to determine the story like a D&D campaign, because of the nature of how they're developed. You can't make... to do that, you would need to make an insane text web that would just take so much dev time. It's just not worth it. So I think the visual novel itself is basically a horrible game genre. Like, the only really good ones are like Doki Doki and maybe Danganronpa, and mostly just because they're so subversive and like meta. So taking like such a poor game genre to begin with and then making your game one of those, like, not the smartest move, I think. But the tactical RPG elements, like the combat in this game, is so fun that it kept me going through what I think is one of the worst, if not the worst, game genre there is. Even if it is Digimon, like, I'm not going to just enjoy it because it's Digimon. So it's too bad to see they didn't put any dev time into things like multiplayer or a scenario editor or any kind of content other than the main game, which is unfortunate, especially given how expensive games are these days. Again, that's not much of a critique on the game as much as it is as a critical commentary on a meta level, but it still needs to be said. The most important thing is that this game has a lot of text and forces you to read it. And I kind of think that from a design standpoint, it starts out slow with a lot of text because it wants you to know that this is a game that you have to read to fully experience. You know, there's a lot of games that are mostly reading, but you don't have to read it. You can just play the game like an RPG, just fight people, go to the next area. Digimon Survive makes you read it, not because you'll miss out on things that tell you what to do, but because through reading it, you get the whole experience. The writing is what makes the reading worth it. Should be pretty obvious, but most video games don't actually have good writing, so that's where we are with that. I kind of think it's insane that Habu, as director of this and the director of CSHM, decided, wow, I made good writing in a video game, and instead of thinking, I'll never try to do that again, that's insane, he said, let's do it again, and he succeeded. Kudos to him, man. But you're taking quite the risk with that one. Or maybe not. Maybe he's just good at it. I was really surprised by how deep and psychological it gets. It has some pretty interesting critiques of Asian cultural traditions, so if you're a Western player, it could be a little bit alienating. Overall, the psychology behind humans seems to be mostly universal. I mean, sure, there's variation between individuals and maybe groups as well, but just from looking at even movies, books, this video game, for instance, the kinds of things that people say, the kinds of ways that we learn to have interpersonal relationships with each other, something that is a huge element of this game, is not only something that in the 21st century that we're kind of on the new horizon on, but something that is shared across all cultures, it seems, to an almost universal extent. So yeah, that's that. Digimon Survive is a game with a really cool battle system and a story that touches on the newest kind of ground in human adventures and psychology and interpersonal relationships. Yeah, so despite my criticisms, and I think overall I would give the game a 9.8 out of 10. It would be a 10 out of 10 if Takuma didn't have all these intrusive thought bubble text boxes, and it had a little bit more focus on things other than the main story. But the fact that the main story is so good, and that it does give you options eventually to play the game as you want, I think that overall the experience is a complete package with what the game comes with. So would I recommend picking it up? If you're ready to read and ready to feel and ready to think, then yeah, definitely. If you want to play a Digimon RPG, play Digimon World 3, Digimon World Dawn or Dusk, or Digimon Cyber Sleuth instead. If you just want to play a traditional old RPG, raise your guys up, fight the bad guys. This game uses that game genre for its combat, but it's not the main focus here. It's kind of amazing that they basically made one of the most fun experiences in their combat, yet it's there as a cherry on top. It's there to supplement the main experience, which is the story. If you've never played Digimon before, why are you watching this channel? Why did you watch this whole video? I would recommend playing Cyber Sleuth and Hacker's Memory first. Then check this one out if you think it's interesting. Alright, that's all, folks. I have some ideas for more Cyber Sleuth content coming up in the future. Probably won't post any content of Survive. It's really just like a personal story kind of experience type of game. Maybe I'll post some meta level content. I don't know. Until then, sub for Spub and see you all in the future.